On Thanksgiving, my parents stopped me at the front entrance and said, "You're not invited, go home." Behind them I saw my sister, my uncle, even my best friend laughing around the table like I had never existed. I just nodded, walked back to my car with the pecan pie still warm in my hands and made one quick phone call. 20 minutes later, my phone blew up, and the screaming started. I'm Maverick Hayes, and this is my story of betrayal family and what happens when the truth finally cuts through the lies. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Sometimes just knowing someone is listening makes the weight lighter. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If this story touches you, please subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know. It tells me I'm not alone in this, and it helps me keep sharing the truth. I cut the engine and sat for a beat, watching the line of cars glint under the afternoon sun. BMW, Lexus, Mercedes. All lined up like trophies. My chest tightened, but I told myself I had done everything right. The pecan pie sat warm on the passenger seat, baked from my grandmother's recipe. Beside it, a bottle of bourbon rare, aged a gift from a client who trusted me. My offerings of peace. I adjusted my cuffs, smoothing the navy fabric that suddenly felt too stiff on my skin. From inside the house came Dolly Parton's voice spilling out of the dining room speakers. A song I had heard in this house since childhood, a melody that once meant comfort but now scraped like glass against my chest. I climbed the steps, pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed in the hall and the heavy door creaked open. Warm yellow light spilled out, reflecting off the gilt frames of family portraits that stared back at me with centuries of judgment. My father stood in the doorway, his frame filling it, shoulders square. My mother hovered just behind him, pearls gleaming at her throat. I lifted the pie with both hands, forcing a steady voice. I brought the recipe grandmother taught me. Thought we could go home. My father's tone was as cold as the November air. You're not invited. Through the narrow opening, I caught a slice of the life I had been cut out of Abigail at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, laughter frozen on her lips as her eyes slid toward me. The chair where I had always sat stood empty for a moment before Jessica, my friend or so I once believed, pulled it out and claimed it. A ripple of silence passed around the table as they noticed me at the door. I swallowed the sting of humiliation. My mother added, her voice smooth but sharp. Every choice has consequences, Maverick. Her bun was pinned high, her pearls catching the chandelier's glow. She looked like a queen issuing a decree untouchable. The smell of butter melting over cornbread drifted toward me. My grip on the pie faltered, its weight slipping as if the house itself rejected it. I stepped backward down the stone steps, the banner in the dining room catching my eye. Family first. It declared in proud cursive, the word family flashing in the glass reflection like a cruel joke. I walked to my car, set the pie and bourbon on the seat beside me, fastening the belt with hands that did not tremble. The engine hummed to life. I didn't turn on the radio. In the rearview mirror, the Belle Meade mansion shrank to a stage where the curtain had just dropped, the actors laughing without me. At the first intersection, I pulled over, phone in hand. My thumb hovered over the name Michael Carter. My old friend now at the SEC. The weight of what I knew pressed down heavier than any rejection. Was I ready to do something I could never take back? I typed one short message. We need to talk about Hayes. Tonight. Then I pressed send, slid the phone aside, and drove on in silence, leaving their laughter behind me. 10 months earlier, I had stood at the head of the glass-walled conference room, pitching a marketing campaign that had taken weeks of sleepless nights. It worked. Hayes Realty Partners had cracked the top 10 realty firms in Tennessee. I expected a nod, maybe even a rare smile. Instead, my father leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. You just make the window dressing, son. Abigail does the real business. The words stung, but I swallowed them. I told myself results mattered more than recognition. That illusion didn't last. Preparing documents for a new client, I spotted transactions routed to a Cayman Islands company, the descriptions vague almost deliberately, so I jotted a note to ask about them, certain there was an explanation. I emailed the finance team attaching the anomalies. By that afternoon, my access to the accounting system was temporarily suspended for maintenance. The timing was too sharp to ignore. In the break room, Jessica touched my wrist gently. "Don't dig too deep," she murmured, her voice the soft concern of a best friend. I forced a smile, but inside something shifted. A chill threaded through me. I went to Uncle Robert, who had once encouraged me to think for myself. He looked around before speaking. "Be careful, Maverick. Some things aren't worth the risk." He didn't tell me to stop, but he didn't tell me to continue either. His hesitation said everything. Days later, I stumbled upon two versions of the same financial report, the one for clients glossy and inflated, and the internal one bleeding red. The discrepancy wasn't creative accounting, it was deceit. I started saving everything. Every email, every draft copied to a personal hard drive and locked inside a safe hidden behind my bookshelf. At a board meeting, Abigail spoke confidently about temporary adjustments to survive a downturn. My father praised her resourcefulness. When I raised a question, he cut me off, dismissing me with a look that said I was wasting everyone's time. That evening, I ran through the Belmead streets, the weight of ancestors' portraits still lingering in my mind. Their eyes, framed in oil and gold, seemed to follow me everywhere. Back home, I stared at the group photo from the lake house at Cumberland. Most would see a family memory. I saw something else, Abigail and Jessica's eyes meeting, their closeness sharper than friendship. I didn't know what it meant yet, but it lodged itself in the back of my mind. I opened a new folder on my hard drive and titled it Thanksgiving. A strange impulse, maybe superstition, but part of me already knew a reckoning was coming. The cracks in Hayes Realty Partners were no longer hairline fractures. They were spreading, and I was the only one willing to look straight at them. 2 months before the door shut in my face, I slid a stack of mock-ups across a polished oak table at Tennessee Land Co. The room smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Their COO leaned forward, running a thumb along the edge of a brochure I'd sweated over. I didn't sell them slogans. I sold them a spine, a brand that promised stewardship of land instead of strip and flip profit. We talked water runoffs, energy-efficient builds, long-term reputation. When the COO finally said, "Let's do it," I felt something in my chest click into place. It wasn't approval from my father. It was something cleaner, self-respect maybe. Back at Hayes, my father didn't ask how I closed the deal. He folded his arms. "What did you promise that exceeded your authority?" "I promised only what we can deliver," I said, voice steady. "On paper. In the contract." His mouth tightened. "We'll see." We did see. I handed in my resignation a week later and announced Hayes Creative Solutions from my kitchen counter with a laptop and a pot of oversteeped coffee. A lawyer from the firm emailed within hours threatening to sue for poaching clients, then backed off after a curt exchange with my own counsel. There wasn't a non-compete they could stand on, and they knew it. I moved to a loft in East Nashville with windows that didn't wear curtains. I hung my grandfather's old guitar on the brick wall and set my desk so I could watch the street below, dogs on morning walks, painters hauling canvases, a food truck humming at noon. The neighborhood had a heartbeat that didn't skip to my family's metronome. I could breathe here. Emma met me at a cafe with a chipped mug and a quiet urgency. "Something big is breaking under the floorboards," she said, fingers drumming the saucer. She didn't hand me any internal documents, she was careful that way, but she slid over a handwritten list of clients who'd been asking too many questions. "They're unhappy, and they're not mad at your father," she whispered. "They're naming Abigail." I tucked the list into my notebook and felt the ground shift again. The golden child wasn't just a symbol anymore. She was attached to exposure and risk. I hired Bethany the next day. She had been the assistant whose ideas got passed over at Hayes because she didn't have the right last name. At my kitchen table, we built the company from a single sheet of paper, writing out values that would go on our website: transparency, stewardship, no smoke and mirrors. It looked simple. It felt radical. Michael Carter rolled through town for a conference and texted me to meet him at a honky-tonk that still served chili from a battered pot. We took stools at the bar while a band covered old standards. He listened without interrupting, then said, "If you have a good faith basis, you have a duty to report. But the difference between rumor and a record is a mile wide." He didn't ask for anything. I didn't give him anything. Not yet. A week before Thanksgiving, I called my mother. 3:00, she said, and I could picture her checking a jewel-toned calendar. Dress appropriately. Don't embarrass the family. The word family landed like a paper-cut small, almost nothing until the sting hit. That night I baked a pecan pie with the index card my grandmother had smudged decades ago. When it cooled, I wrote my name Maverick on a neat white label in black ink and pressed it to the tin. It felt like staking a claim I belong to this tradition too, even if I practice it differently. The next afternoon, a client dropped off a bottle of bourbon to celebrate our contract. I set it beside the pie and tried to imagine a toast that wasn't hollow. Maybe I'd raise a glass to the people who stood beside me because of who I was, not what I represented. Maybe that was what family could be. On the night before Thanksgiving, I opened the safe hidden behind my bookshelf. The metal was cool against my palms. I checked the hard drive with my email archives, the contracts I'd signed since leaving a stack of handwritten thank you notes from new clients who valued straightforward answers. I closed the safe and studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The old need to be invited to be seen was still there, but it wasn't steering anymore. I wasn't afraid. I was clear. I set my alarm and lay awake listening to the city breathe. In the morning, I would walk into a house crowned with a banner that read, "Family First." I'd always thought it meant loyalty. I was starting to understand it meant silence. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of a long table and a seat with my name on it. In the dream, someone else took it before I reached the room. That night, after the door closed and the lights of Belle Meade receded in my rear view, I sat at my kitchen table with the pecan pie still taped shut and the bourbon unopened. The loft held a different kind of quiet than the mansion, no clink of crystal, no curated laughter. Just the hum of my building, the soft echo of a neighbor's footsteps in the hall. I slid the bookshelf aside and turned the combination on the safe. The door swung open with a sigh. I pulled out the hard drive and the folders I'd been feeding for months like a cautious animal. Contracts, emails, internal reports saved by habit and instinct. I lined them up on the table and began to read, pen in hand, marking margins the way I'd been taught to mark arguments in law school before I changed majors. Patterns emerged, not elegant but brazen. Transfers stepping through shell companies, disappearing into a Cayman entity with a vanilla name, then surfacing in Nashville dressed as donations. My stomach went cold as a line item looped back into a charitable foundation with my mother's name on it. The Country Music Preservation Fund. She hosted luncheons for the one photographed in Society pages, beside a backdrop of vintage guitars. Money washing through Goodwill. It took my breath. I opened another folder, this one of emails I'd flagged because they gave me splinters. There it was, plain as a knuckle to the jaw. Maverick asked about Johnson's account. I distracted him. Signed by Jessica with her looping initials like a flourish on a birthday card. I didn't need to imagine her voice. I could hear it. Soft, apologetic, deliberate. A thinner folder held photographs from the lake at Cumberland. Summer light casting long shadows across the dock water polished to a dark coin. In one frame, Abigail and Jessica stood closer than the camera's polite distance, a quiet intimacy settling over their shoulders. I stared until the image blurred. The personal and professional had braided together stronger than either one separately strong enough to hold me outside their circle. The last envelope was heavier. Documents tied with a rubber band that snapped when I pulled it. A trust authorization with my name across the top. My signature at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. The slope of the M, the clipped K, the flourish on the last letter. Too careful, too performed, like someone imitating a song they didn't know the tune to. It looked disturbingly like Abigail's meeting notes, the ones she used to leave on my desk as friendly reminders. I rubbed the paper between my fingers. It left no smudge. It left a mark anyway. I set the papers in one stack and leaned back, closing my eyes. If I did nothing, I wasn't just complicit. I was erased. The thought sat with me until it felt like truth. I called Michael. He answered on the first ring. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I'm ready, I said. I have everything. He gave me a secure link and a checklist he'd probably repeated 100 times to 100 people who never thought they'd become this person. I followed every instruction. I uploaded scans and spreadsheets, emails and authorizations, photographs and notes. My cursor hesitated over the final send. Somewhere across town, my family was cutting into turkey and passing the cornbread. I clicked. The apartment changed shape around me as if the walls inhaled. My phone buzzed on the table. Then again. Then non-stop. Texts from my father stacking in blue blocks. Calls from Abigail, a stream of emails from Jessica, subject lines lining up like flashing hazard lights. I let them accumulate until the screen dimmed. The voicemail icon rose like a stubborn bubble. I pressed it and put the phone on speaker. My father's voice filled the room loud enough you would think he was standing in the doorway again. You fix this in 20 minutes or you're no son of mine. Static caught the edges of his words. Another message, my mother this time, the controlled cadence slipping into something messy. Maverick, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about your father. A breath, a muted conversation in the background, and then the line cut. I didn't reply. I sat with the sound until it stopped echoing. Out the window, the streetlight threw a pale square on the floor. The pie tin gleamed where the label caught it. I poured a splash of bourbon and didn't drink it, letting the scent open like a memory I could handle without swallowing. My laptop pinged receipt confirmed, files intact. A short line from Michael, got them. We'll handle it from here. The phone kept buzzing, then slowed, then started again like a storm finding a second wind. I left it on the table and walked to the window. Across the way, a couple washed dishes together, their laughter floating out a cracked pane. I watched the water run and thought about the banner over my parents' table. Family first. I had believed it once. Tonight, the words meant something else, a motto used to bind mouths closed and sign names that weren't theirs. I slid the safe door shut and returned the bookshelf. The loft felt both heavier and lighter, like what happens after you speak a difficult truth in a room that wasn't built to hear it. I cleaned the table, stacking the remaining papers in a neat pile. The bourbon went back in its box. The pie stayed where it was a small moon under a kitchen star. When the phone finally fell silent, I set my alarm and lay down fully dressed shoes on the rug jacket over the chair. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I listened to the elevator cables, to someone starting a shower, to a siren fading toward the interstate. Noise moved through the building, then away like weather. Somewhere near midnight, a new message landed in my inbox, automated confirmation from a system I didn't recognize. The subject line was a case number. I stared at it until the digits burned into my vision. By morning, their voices would rise again. By morning, they'd come knocking. I pressed my palms to my eyes and breathed until I could imagine opening the door without shaking. I had crossed the line I drew for myself. There was no way back through that house, not the way I had tried to go. The pounding rattled the door, my father's voice thundering through the wood. Open this door right now. For a second, I stayed still, breathing against the pressure that seemed to shake the loft itself. Then I walked across the floor, each step deliberate, and turned the lock. Thomas stood there, shirt collar undone, his usually sculpted hair falling into his eyes. Behind him, Margaret clutched her shawl face, pale but tight with control. Abigail's eyes were red, as if she had been crying, though her jaw was hard. Jessica kept her gaze on the ground, her shoulders hunched inward. Inside, my father barked, shoving forward. We need to talk. I stepped back, leaving the door wide. Then talk. But you'll do it in here at my table. They shuffled in under the glow of the single lamp. The loft felt smaller with them inside, their perfume and cologne battling the smell of bourbon I had opened earlier. My father slammed his fist on the table. You will call the SEC and tell them this is a misunderstanding. I sat opposite, folding my hands. No. Margaret's voice softened, almost pleading. We can give you back your position, more authority than before. You'll have control, influence. Just take this back and we'll fix everything as a family. I shook my head slowly. You don't get to buy back silence with titles. Abigail's composure cracked. She leaned across the table, her voice sharp and breaking. When the market crashed in 2019, I adjusted the numbers, I saved the company. If it weren't for me, none of you would have anything. Her confession filled the air like smoke. I looked at her directly. And what about my trust? What about the signature that isn't mine? Her mouth snapped shut. My father cut in furious. That's a lie. Don't you dare accuse your sister of forgery. Jessica's shoulders trembled. Tears ran freely as she finally spoke. I never meant to hurt you. I thought if I kept you out, I was protecting you. I told them things because I believed it would keep you safe. I stared at her, the girl I had once trusted with every secret. A true friend doesn't stay seated when I'm thrown out of my own family's dinner. A true friend walks out too. The knock came again, softer this time. I opened the door to find Robert, chest heaving, his tie crooked. He pushed past the others, eyes wide. The SEC has frozen the accounts. They're looking for someone to hold accountable. And Thomas, he turned to my father. You plan to make Maverick the scapegoat. My father's silence was louder than any denial. The truth showed in his eyes. I stood the chair, scraping against the floor. I've made my choice. The truth is out. My attorney will handle the rest. Thomas straightened, his voice low and cutting. Then hear me now. You are no longer a Hayes. Margaret clutched his arm, tears breaking through the mask. She pulled him toward the door. Abigail followed her, face stone again. Jessica lingered, whispering, I'm sorry, before slipping out behind them. Robert stayed. He placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, even if it costs us all. The loft door clicked shut, and the silence that returned wasn't emptiness. It was resolve. 1 week later, my name was everywhere. SEC investigates Hayes Realty Partners for Ponzi fraud. The local paper ran a photograph of me leaving my lawyer's office, tie loose eyes set ahead. The caption beneath read, Whistleblower steps forward. The phone wouldn't stop. Some former clients called to thank me. Others accused me of destroying the only business they trusted. Friends who used to drop by stopped answering texts, unwilling to be associated with the mess. Among the pile of envelopes slipped under my door, one was written in my mother's hand. I opened it carefully. You can still save us. Don't let them destroy your father. We are begging you to protect the family name. I folded it once, then again, and placed it in a drawer I did not plan to open. By evening, Abigail's strategy was in motion. A polished PR statement spread across Nashville media, painting me as bitter, cast out, and hungry for revenge. My picture flashed on the evening news with a headline, Disgruntled Son Targets His Own Family. An anonymous email landed in my inbox. Be careful. They'll come for your personal life next. I thought of the photographs from Cumberland, how easily a narrative could be spun, how quickly private moments could be turned into weapons. Michael called that night. The SEC has everything they need, he assured me. You've done your part. Stay firm. But his steady tone couldn't erase the shadows gathering around me. The next morning, I opened social media to find my name trending. A post claimed I had benefited from my trust, implying I was no different from the rest. Screenshots spread, comments burned. Lies traveled faster than facts. Robert phoned soon after. His voice was tired, but his words were clear. Thomas is lobbying the board to place all blame on you. Some members resist, they know you left before the fraud peaked. But he's relentless. I thanked him, though my throat was tight. Later that afternoon, Emma arrived at my office with a folder. She set it on the desk, her expression steady. A new client. They came to me asking for Hayes Creative Solutions. They said they wanted someone they could trust. I flipped through the papers, the ink fresh, signatures bold. Proof that truth could still carry weight in a city used to gilded lies. That night I sat alone with the lights low and a record spinning. Tennessee whiskey drifted through the room, smooth and rough all at once. I let the lyrics soak into me, a reminder that I wasn't standing only for myself. I was standing for every person who had ever been told to keep quiet in the name of family, every voice that had been smothered under the banner of family first. The world outside my window still spun with doubt, accusation, and noise. Inside, I held fast to the one thing they couldn't take from me, the choice I had made. And I knew the fight was far from over. 6 months after the holiday nobody in my family would speak about, I pushed open the door to a federal conference room cold enough to keep orchids alive forever. The ceiling rose high above polished wood walls, the lights bright and clinical. Reporters sat along the back row, notebooks ready. A handful of clients I recognized from holiday parties and groundbreakings stared at me like I was the only person who'd ever told them the weather was turning. At the far end of the table sat my father, jaw-set, hands folded so tightly the knuckles were white. Abigail was to his right, perfect posture. Eyes burning with a steadiness I knew she'd practiced in mirrors. The chair between them and the microphone reserved for their counsel was empty for a moment, then filled by a man with a blue tie and a briefcase that looked like it had never touched the floor. He opened with my name. He recited my title at the company, dotted every I in the story of my access. He said it calmly, as if giving the time. Given his position, he concluded it is not only plausible but likely that Mr. Hayes participated in or benefited from the irregularities in question. The panel turned to me. "Did you receive any benefit from the trust established in your name?" one asked. I slid a packet across the table, clear sleeves catching the light. "This is a certified comparison," I said, the words steadier than my breath. "My signature and the one filed on the trust authorization. They are not the same hand." A forensic examiner's stamp on the last page shone like a small court seal. I did not sign those documents. The room shifted. Pens paused. The blue-tied attorney barely blinked. I asked the clerk to pull up an email on the screen. The monitor flickered, then displayed a message from Jessica to my father and Abigail. The line that had lived in my head for months glared in black type. Maverick asked about Johnson's account. I distracted him. A low whisper ran along the back row. Cameras clicked in a staccato rhythm. I placed another folder on the table. "This is the Tennessee Land Comfort contract." Date stamped. I had resigned and incorporated my new firm before the transfers at issue accelerated. My role at Hayes during the period they cite was non-existent. I had left. One of the SEC attorneys reviewed the pages, looked up, and offered a small nod. It wasn't a victory parade, but it felt like air. Across from me, Abigail's composure cracked. "If I hadn't done what I did, the company would have collapsed," she said, voice rising. "We were days from default. I kept the doors open." My father touched her elbow, a warning, but the microphone fed every syllable to the back row. A man stood up from the audience, his gray suit soft at the elbows, grief making his shoulders curve. "You took my retirement," he said, voice shaking. "You told me it was safe, that my grandchildren would be fine." Flashbulbs popped. The panel raised a hand for quiet that didn't come quickly. I faced my father. "You taught me to say it before every decision," I said. "Family first." "But you turned those words into a shield to hide behind. You used our name as cover." The sentence didn't echo. It landed and stayed. The panel recessed. When they returned, the lead attorney read findings in an even cadence that did not belong to any family I knew. The Cayman accounts were frozen. Control of Hayes Realty Partners would be removed from my father pending further action. Abigail would be subject to a separate review. My name was not on the list of those under sanction. Reporters moved as if on cue. The man in the gray suit sat down and put his hands over his face. My father didn't look at me, not once. Abigail stared at a knot in the wood as if it might split, and let her fall through. When it ended, I gathered my papers, slid them into my bag, and stood. Outside, the summer heat wrapped around me like a different planet's atmosphere. I took a breath that didn't taste like varnish and walked toward the street, feeling every step as if I was learning to use my legs again. A year after the door closed in my face, my new apartment filled with the smell of roasted turkey and sweet cornbread. The table was longer than the one I used to set, built from reclaimed wood that still carried faint scars. I'd borrowed chairs from neighbors, none matched. I liked that. It meant each seat had a story. I laid out plates that had come from yard sales and friends' attics, polished to a shine but still chipped in places. A pie cooled on the counter, glossy pecans set like small shields. Tennessee whiskey drifted from the speakers, warm and rough and exactly right. The first knock was gentle. Michael arrived with his wife carrying a bouquet of wildflowers tied with string. He hugged me the way men hug when they have lived through something together and don't need to say much about it. Robert came next with his partner laughing at the way my oven ran hot. Bethany slipped in with a casserole dish and a grin that said she'd timed every project this week down to the minute. Emma brought a bottle of wine and a client's note tucked into the ribbon. Thank you for telling the truth. Two of our clients, now friends, stepped into the room as if they'd always belonged there. They put down store-bought rolls and offered to carve the turkey. The apartment felt bigger with them in it. Then another knock. I opened the door and found Abigail on the threshold, hair pulled back, no gold on her wrists, a pie tin in her hands. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the light she used to wear like armor. I wasn't sure if I should come, she said, but I baked this. She lifted the tin an inch. The top gleamed with familiar gloss. For a heartbeat, I saw 3 versions of us, at once children sneaking extra slices in a marble kitchen, adults at a glossy table pretending not to hear what mattered, and 2 siblings at a doorway learning new language with old mouths. I stepped aside. Come in. She moved softly through the room, nodding to Robert, to Emma, to the faces she'd once seen only as accounts. She set the pie on the counter and turned to me with something wrapped in brown paper. For you, she said. I unwrapped it. The bourbon label was a match for the bottle I'd carried last year, like a bridge that nobody crossed. I met her eyes. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. We sat. The conversation rose and fell without orchestration jokes landing where they wanted. Someone asked about the guitar on the wall, and I told a story about my grandfather's hands. Michael refilled water glasses. Robert offered to say grace and then didn't, choosing instead a few simple words that held. To those who chose the hard thing when the easy thing was silence, he said, to the table that's here because of it. I swallowed around the tightness in my throat and looked down the line of mismatched chairs. No one asked for Crystal. No one measured the evening by who sat where. The banner that used to hang over my parents' dining room returned in my mind, and for the first time it meant something I could keep. Family first, but not as a command, as a promise you make with your actions. After plates were cleared and pie was served, I stood and took a folded page from my pocket. The paper had been handled enough to soften. I wrote something I said, and the room quieted without effort. I want to thank you for showing up when it wasn't fashionable or safe, for helping me build a place where the floor doesn't give way under our feet. I used to think family was a set of names on a mailbox. Tonight I know it's the people who keep a chair open when the world shuts a door. I looked at Abigail. She held my gaze. I'm trying, she said. The words were small and plain and heavier than apology. I nodded. Trying counts, I answered. Trying is how anything starts. Later, after hugs at the door and promises to meet at the farmer's market on Saturday, I washed dishes while the last of the music played. Abigail stayed to dry quiet by my side. We didn't talk about the past as inventory. We didn't write new terms for old debts. We just passed plates hand to hand, water running warm over the edges, 2 people choosing not to drop what they'd been given. When the sink was empty, we stood in the doorway and watched the city lights bounce off the windows of the buildings across the street. She put on her coat. Thank you, she said. For the pie. For letting me in. After she left, I walked back to the table and ran my palm over the wood. It was scarred and strong, beautiful because of what it had already survived. I turned down the music, blew out the candles, and looked around the room that had held us. No portrait watched from the walls. No slogan hung in scripted letters. Still, I felt it settle around me, the kind of belonging that doesn't ask you to shrink to fit it. I picked up the empty pie tin, the old bourbon now opened, and smiled at how circles can close without anyone drawing a line. The city breathed through the window. I breathed with it, and for the first time in a long time, the word home felt like something I had built with my own hands. Looking back now, I realize that being turned away on Thanksgiving was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of finally reclaiming myself. The door they closed on me forced me to open another one built on truth, integrity, and people who chose to stand beside me because of who I am, not what I could provide. It hurt deeply to see my own family laugh while I stood outside, but sometimes it takes losing what you thought was unshakable to discover what truly matters. Family isn't always the people who share your last name. Sometimes it's the ones who show up when the storm hits and refuse to leave your side. That's what I've learned, and that's what keeps me moving forward. If my story resonates with you, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me keep sharing the truth, and it reminds me that I'm not alone. Leave a comment, let me know where you're from, or simply say listening. Every message means more than you can imagine. Thank you for being here with me, and thank you for hearing